Good afternoon and welcome to the NORS training, Train the Trainer session. Today we have with us a real variety of experts and experienced ombudsmen in NORS reporting. We have Louise Ryan, who's the Aging Program Specialist with AOA. We have Sarah Hunt, a former state ombudsman and consultant with the National Ombudsman Resource Center. Joe Rodriguez, California State Long-Term Care Ombudsman and President of NASOP. We have Eileen Bennett, for Ombudsman from Montgomery County, Maryland, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Kim Shetler, Regional Ombudsman Coordinator from Pennsylvania, and Jackie Majoris, the Vermont State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. And I am Shelley Hitt, the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman in Colorado. Today, our goal is to provide tips to make ongoing NORS training engaging and beneficial. There are times when it can seem like we're just saying the same thing over and over and over again, and our staff sort of roll their eyes when we whip out those NORS modules. And so our goal today, a collaboration between the NASOP Data WINC Committee, the National Ombudsman Resource Center, and AOA to try and give you some tips and some tools to make your NORS training more interesting and at least keep the ombudsman awake till the training's over. We're going to be using the NORS training modules that were developed by state and local ombudsmen and AOA a number of years ago. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to talk to you about what the WINC Committee is. We're going to get some perspective from AOA. We're going to get some training tips. Some training tips from Sarah, our consultant, and from other state and local ombudsmen. We're going to get tips from everyone here. We're going to do some question and answer as well. We are asking that you hold your questions till the end as we're recording this for all our colleagues who are not here. As I said, I'm the chairperson of the WINC Committee. This was a group that was formed in 2003. It stands for the Work Group to Improve NORS Consistency. However, I still like to think of it as, why is NORS so confusing? And having been a state ombudsman for 3.5 years, I'm just barely sort of getting my head above water in terms of really understanding what this is all about. And the WINC Committee is a group of state and local ombudsmen who do a monthly conference call, 90 minutes. We receive questions from ombudsmen around the country, both state and local, and we put our heads together, do some research. We look at NORS instructions and guidance that has come from AOA. And our own collective experience, and try and come up with a consensus answer that we think is consistent, solid, and that we can then get the blessing of AOA for that answer and then post it and distribute it to all of our ombudsmen. As we all know, consistency in our data is critical if it's going to tell our story and do the things that we all want data to do. And so with our new Assistant Secretary, Kathy Greenlee, and her interest in reliable and consistent data, this topic is very timely, and we've spent a number of months working on this. So we encourage you to submit your coding questions to the WINC, to me. My email address is listed there on the slide. You can call me, you can email me. I'll see that it gets to our committee. We'll get you an answer as soon as possible. We try to be thorough, consistent, and concise, and sometimes that's not fast, but we are doing our best to speed up our process so that you can have an answer you can rely on, because I think historically there have been a lot of information and answers floating around out there, but they hadn't always really been vetted or approved, and that has maybe led to some of the inconsistency. So that is WINC. Now I'd like to turn it over to Louise Ryan, our representative from AOA, to talk to us on your perspective.
Just a few words from the Administration on Aging. We take the big picture view of data, and I want to just emphasize that while we take the big picture view, I encourage you to use your data to help you in your local needs, whether that's program evaluation or systems advocacy. that, the data has many uses. But at the Administration on Aging, we're looking at the national data, and we look at what changes over time. Do complaints go up? Do they go down? What are the most common complaint categories? And how many volunteer hours were provided? And that information is provided to Congress. And so it doesn't just sit there. It is used. It's used to support funding. It's used to support the kind of showing how the Older Americans Act works on a day-to-day basis. And if you want to look at the data in more of a big picture way, there's a couple of resources. There's a website called AGID, A-G-I-D, I forget if it's org or net, but if you just Google AGID, you will get to it. It's the Aging Integrated Database. And then also the AOA website, if you go to the Long-Term Care Ombudsman web page, you will find the NORS data. And as we throw around acronyms, NORS, of course, is the National Ombudsman Reporting System, and that is the data that we collect, your cases, complaints, consultations, etc. But a lot of you may not know, how does what you collect on a day-to-day basis get to AOA? And it gets to AOA through the Ombudsman reporting tool. So the data goes to your state ombudsman, and then it is compiled, it is verified, it is uploaded to AOA, where we go through a process of kind of really looking at the data for any potential irregularities that might mean the data is not correct. So state ombudsmen get calls to say, why is your data looking like this year when last year it was this way? So that's part of the process. And then eventually all the data is certified. And we use it. And we use it for annual report to Congress, and we use it in budget justifications. The one other thing I would say is we want you to be as consistent as possible in your coding of data, your coding of complainants, complaint types, activities. But I also say, don't agonize over it so much that you waste a whole bunch of time. There's a balance there. And part of what I think of is, are you in the right, if you're thinking of a grocery store, are you in the right section? If it's vegetables and you're in the meat department, you're in the wrong section. So looking at your complaint codes and those big topic areas, I think always helps you to figure out how to kind of focus in on what you're trying to code. And I think repetition is really important. Practice, practice, practice. And that is why, AOA with the Ombudsman Resource Center and the WINC have revived the consistency trainings. And hopefully as we can continue to do that, and that'll also be at the state level, that state ombudsman will also replicate that. And I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Louise. I'm Sarah Hunt with the Ombudsman Resource Center, a consultant. And I wanted to go over some of the basics about the NORS training, the resources we have, where you can find training modules, and then give you a few tips that I've collected from a variety of sources. Number one, the foundational information Louise mentioned. There are 4 modules for training NORS, for teaching people to do the coding and to try to improve consistency. These modules were developed by state and local ombudsmen and AOA participation a number of years ago. They were pilot tested, refined, revised, and as Shelley mentioned, they're going through another round of updates and revisions. The foundation for all of the teaching has to do with the NORS instructions from the Administration on Aging. The current instructions are good through 2012. At that point, there will be another version out. So anytime you are doing training, you need to download the most recent instructions or pull out your current one, because those instructions are unchanging, and we go back to those many times when we're doing the training. One of the ways that we tried to help, we as a resource center tried to help ombudsmen understand that thinking in terms of case, complaint, consultation, complaint category, resolution, outcome, follow-up is part of your ongoing work as an ombudsman. And the NORS coding is a way of capturing some of the basic work that you do. It's not, I do all this work and oh no, now I've got my own set of paper compliance to get the state ombudsman off my back. I've got to come up with the code. So one way we tried to impart that is in the basic equipping ombudsman for basic advocacy, effective advocacy, the basic curriculum modules developed by the Ombudsman Resource Center that a number of states are using variations of this as their beginning training for staff and volunteers. So sprinkled throughout those curriculum modules are NORS terms. Case and the definition of case, complaint, the NORS definition of complaint. As you begin thinking about complaint categories, that's mentioned there. There are tips, teaching tips, if you want to insert into your own teaching curriculum how people will be coding it and give them examples of where they code certain things. So they're very easy ways to help people start thinking of the NORS reporting and coding as part of their ongoing casework. So it's sprinkled there. The curriculum is not designed to teach NORS coding, but it's getting your toe in the door so people see that as coming together as part of their ombudsman work. And thinking about conducting NORS training, and we really are eager to hear some of the experiences and tips of you in the room. So we're not thinking that we're giving you all brand new information you've never thought of. We're trying to pull it together in one concise form. Obviously, doing your background preparation. What is it you want to emphasize? When states call and ask me to come in and do NORS Module 1 or Module 2 or all the NORS training, I say, fine. Now, what is it you really want me to do? Well, all of it. Well, which pieces are you having issues with? So what are the most frequent questions you have that come up around NORS coding? When you look at your NORS reports, where do you see that there are sweeping inconsistencies from program to program? Or when you look at it in aggregate for your state, what really doesn't line up? And is there a possibility with your perception of what you know is going on or what you think is going on versus what your data says? And is there any piece of that discrepancy that maybe could be explained because of a lack of consistency in NORS coding? So maybe it's time to focus in on that part of the training and the coding to try to see if you can bring what's captured in NORS more in line with what you know to be the prevailing ombudsman practice and experience out in the field. So do your homework. Then think through, are there any applicable policies, guidelines, regulations that you have relating to when do you close a case? How long do you carry a case? What do you do if a resident's deceased? Is that an ombudsman case or not? Do you open a case or do you just say we don't do that? Are there areas that you want to emphasize in training that you have policy and guidance on? If so, pull out your policies and have those ready. Then obviously, square one, who's your audience? If you're training brand new people, new to the ombudsman role, you want to keep it very basic, very clear. If you are doing a refresher course for experienced ombudsmen, then you can anticipate more what ifs. Yes, but, well, what if this? Well, I just don't agree with that. I think that coding's wrong. So be ready for those questions. And that's where your policy guidelines, having your NORS instructions, the full set there, really come in handy. If you have a mixed audience, be sure that you start with the basic premise, you answer some questions, but you always come back to here's the basic bottom line, and you make it very clear and very explicit so you don't add to a lot of confusion at the local level with new people. Then obviously, what are you going to teach? And I've mentioned that already. Is it just the basic coding, or are you trying to get more consistency in specific kinds of areas? Do you have the most recent materials? I have sometimes been driven almost over the brink with version control because the modules have gone through several updates. What the WINC is doing now is as each module is updated, we're doing a webinar on it and we're posting the latest versions, and Louise has been very good about putting the latest date on all the materials that have been touched and revised. So those are posted on the Ombudsman Resource Center website. So before you do training, no matter how many times you've done the training, download the most recent materials. We've updated 2 modules. We're still tweaking them occasionally. If further changes occur, we'll pull down the old version from the website and put the changed one, revised one up. There are PowerPoints that go along with the webinars. As we revise the last 2 modules, they will be moved to that site. And well, they're already there, but the complete set will be there with updated versions. So always go to the website before you conduct a training. Make sure you have the latest information. How much time? Sometimes states have asked me to do 2 modules in 3 hours. Well, you have to figure out what you're going to focus on and in what amount of detail and depth, and I talk with them about trade-offs. If you have a whole day to do 3 modules, you can get more into helping people really understand how you think through which aisle of the supermarket you want to be in and answer more questions. Or 2 or 3 things you really want to focus on in detail. So what's your time frame? What makes sense to cover? And my rule of thumb is when you decide what you want to do and about how much time you think it's going to take, almost double that. If you really want to teach people to think and make sure they've got it, add more time. I found it really helpful in NORS training, especially when you have a group of experienced people, to do a little bit on who cares? What difference does it make besides the state ombudsman quits hounding you to turn in your report? And to talk a little bit about the big framework of what happens once the state ombudsman pushes send and it goes up to the national level. Does anybody look at it? Well, it's vastly important. It has long-ranging, far-ranging implications for the program, some more so than we would ever dream. So if people understand that it really is an advocacy tool, it's a program management tool, and a lot of people are using that as their first look at whether or not the ombudsman program is even important to have anymore, it kind of frames it like, oh, okay, yeah, this is serious. It's not just something that I'll get to if I have time because I'm doing the real work of the ombudsman world. Being upfront when you begin the training and throughout the training and at the end of the training about what NORS is and what it is not. Because when you start teaching coding, people always want to expand their codes or slide more into it or get really upset because NORS doesn't capture certain things. It's a coding system. It's designed to capture big pieces of ombudsman mandated work related to complaints that's used in a variety of ways. It was never designed to capture 100% of what ombudsmen do. And it was never designed to be a time management tool to track your time for grants. Some programs have grants to do other things. There are a lot of things NORS was not designed to do, and a lot of times people get upset and want to argue with you in training about that. So you bring them back to, here's the point in NORS. Teaching tips for modules. What follows are just a variety of tips that I'm going to run through really quickly that I have learned the hard way from teaching NORS in a lot of different states in different ways, as well as listening to you folks, ombudsmen, talk about how you teach it, and then going through some of the real early draft versions of the modules. They had some teaching tips. I thought, oh, that's a great idea. So that's what I've captured in these slides. It's not a Sarah Hunt original giving you pearls of wisdom from my mouth, although I wish it were. So bottom line, I've talked about stating and reiterating the purpose of training. Whenever you get stuck in your conducting training around a quiz, an answer, a clarification, and people are saying, well, I thought it was this, well, I thought it was that, and you look at the little summary, especially with complaint categories, it's like, well, I don't have a clue. That's when you pull out the NORS instructions and go back to the full set of instructions and read it. And then you go back and reason it out aloud with the group, and it helps everybody get, oh, okay. And it helps tremendously, I found, to have the NORS instructions for whatever section you're doing the training on right and with people in the training room so they can pull it out and look at it themselves, because that too is a learning device. Build in participation. And unlike what we can do in this format today, shift your energy, your pace, especially if you're doing a whole day of NORS. Different techniques for different modules. I walk around the room a lot, and that wakes people up. I shift the order if I'm having people read. I start in the middle of the room, I start in the back of the room, I start in the front of the room. Sometimes I ask for volunteers, sometimes I draft people. Jot the key points down, whatever you can do to create some energy, momentum, and participation, and change it throughout the whole time you're doing the training. Basic principles in at least 2 of the modules have a set of basic principles. It's kind of, you have to have this as your foundation before you can answer the quiz questions. It helps a lot, even though people may be very experienced ombudsmen, to have them read aloud the principles. And then if you have the time to ask, okay, give me an example of this. Somebody else, give me a different example of this. And like for the 3 C's, somebody gives you an example of a case. Well, why isn't that a consultation? Because it has this, this, and this in it. And have them explain to you why it isn't. So you get people engaged in thinking about it from the very beginning. Complaint coding. This one can get kind of long to go through. And whenever I've tried to condense it, I've regretted it because I think you miss teaching opportunities. And the original module said leave, I've forgotten, 2 hours, 3 hours for doing this, and I thought, oh, that's a long time on codes. But when I followed that instructions, or the suggested guidelines, it really works. And one of them was going around the room and having everybody read a code, just boom, boom, boom. And then for the big categories of codes, have 1 or 2 people give you an example of a case they had that fit that category. And then you can ask, well, this other category has similar title, why wasn't it this? Why was it this one? So you engage them in using their brains, and if they can explain to themselves and their peers why it's this and not this, you know that they're beginning to understand the rationale. And like Louise said, don't overanalyze and obsess about is it this one or that one if you've got it in the right big grouping. But it helps people to understand that there are big categories, and here's what this one means versus this other one. I'll give you some examples in a minute. One example for just the coding is there are several categories that have to do with some of the same things, but in one of the complaint category quizzes, there's an example that talks about a resident wasn't sent to the hospital for x-rays after falling in the dining room, although she complained several times that her wrist was hurting. The correct answer is F46, physician services, including podiatrist. On the example of that, it's hard to reconcile if the resident's complaining about her wrist hurting, she wasn't sent to the hospital, and the code is physician services podiatrist. Well, why is it that? The facility should have sent her and gotten to the hospital or called the physician or gotten the medical attention she needed. There's some other codes in that category on the quiz that look like they would be better fits. That's when you pull out the NORS instructions and you read the full definition of F46 versus F40, which would be accidents, or F48, symptoms unattended to. And when you read it, the explanation of that is you use it for failure of the facility to obtain physician services upon a change in a resident's condition, or if medical attention, including podiatrist, service is not obtained in a timely manner or not obtained at all. So that's what you need to do as you look at these, is have people pull it out and learn to think. Another example is there are 3 different categories that relate to communication. So some of the quiz answers talk about communication, so you have to really focus in on if it's, as you see at this example, B14 is a quiz answer to the question that I have up here. You have people explain to you why it's this one and not this other. For the quiz, there are several tips I'm going to just touch on really fast. Remember, the purpose is to learn, and a lot of times it's affirmation. You can couch it this way with people. You've been doing this for a while. It's to give you that good pat on the back, or to help make sure we're correctly capturing all that you do. Always let it be self-grading. Use the answer key and your own background preparation. You can go through and decide which quiz questions you want to highlight. Which ones do you want to prompt and ask questions about? Which ones do you want to point to your own program guidance? As you go through it, check for understanding of the principles. And you've got some tips up here about what to do. Select the codes where you know you receive a lot of questions. If there are different views about the correct answer, ask them to explain their rationale for their answers. because that's helping people learn. If you can explain one way versus the other and then talk through why the right answer is the right answer, and the quiz answer key is excellent for giving you rationale, then you know people are getting it if they can stop and articulate it. Bonus questions, a lot of times you can use for people who've done their quiz really quickly and they're sitting there waiting for others to finish. You get them to do the bonus question. Obviously, you can give prizes for the correct responses. If they got 100% right, one state or maybe more, that quiz, the coding quiz is so long. They have people write their names on an answer sheet, a whole category, and if they got all the answers right, they take those up, and at the end of the session, they pull out of those correct answers for door prizes. Don't overthink the scenarios. This is going back to that stating the obvious. Norse coding is all about making a choice. It's not spending 30 minutes making a choice. It's what's the most obvious thing that jumps out at you about this. And then that's the typically the code you go to. If in doubt, go to the instructions. Keep the module focus in your teaching on the context and purpose. Louise talked about that. So sometimes people are saying, well, why not this? What if that? You go back to we're looking at disposition codes. We're not talking about ombudsman practice and all the things a person did or didn't do. We're looking at how this is the outcome. You've got this fact scenario. How do you code it? Use those to teach use the modules to teach coding. Avoid becoming sidetracked. And I put this heading in there because you need to get some practice in. And I just talking about the what ifs and explaining why it's this, not that, or what would turn a case into a consultation. Making sure that you give the answer about, yes, that's correct because, and you summarize for them the key differences. If you get too ingrained in the what ifs, or I had this case and I had this one, then you're going to get over into the land of where Wink should be weighing in on the gray issues. You want enough so you know people are getting it, but you don't want it to turn it into a casework training when your purpose is to teach people Norse coding. It's kind of a fine line, but you've got to rein it in. But you want them to think, but you got to rein it back in. If a quiz question is, it depends, and then you look at how to analyze it, and you're teaching brand new people, you might want to move that to the end of the quiz. Few summary slides. Ongoing training is essential for everybody. Experience and repetition increase understanding and reinforce the learning and retention. You need Norse training no matter how many times you've been on the job, how many years, how much coding you've done, because there tends to be kind of a drifting away. I know that. You get used to the shorthand. And sometimes reading the instructions again helps. Oh, yeah, really it should be. Or at least you get the group coming together and saying, okay, this is what we really need to do. We really want you to share your innovations and your ideas with us. Today's session is the first start in that. As you use these modules, if you have tips you don't get to share with us today, please email me or share them with Shelley. We want to create a way to post a lot of those up on the NORC site so you can get good training tips from your peers to kind of keep it fresh. And in that vein, we have several state and local ombudsmen coming up to share very quickly some of what they do and how they do it, and then we're going to open it for discussion.
I'm Jackie Majoris. I'm the state long-term care ombudsman in Vermont. I was part of the original WINC that developed the modules. And as everyone's mentioned, the WINC was really committed to improving consistency in how we record our data. And being on the WINC, the original WINC, it was really apparent that we all had drifted, as Sarah said, pretty far apart. And the modules were really designed to bring us back together again and to ensure that our data would be consistent. One thing the WINC decided right away, or pretty quickly, was that we needed standardized training modules. So we worked really hard to develop those. And when I say worked really hard, I mean we spent hours and hours on the phone talking about, you would not believe the detail. You just wouldn't believe it, really. How much time we spent discussing this code versus that code, whether something was a case or consultation. And it was amazing during these conversations to listen to people switch back and forth. They would think they knew it, and then they'd hear, a co-worker talk about it, and they'd say, well, no, maybe I'm wrong. And it was just incredible. So at the end of this process, I felt pretty comfortable with the modules. I mean, I knew we had talked about it, we had vetted it, we had piloted it, so I felt good about them. And I was really committed to using the modules in Vermont without modifying them. I mean, partly I couldn't bear the thought of modifying them after having gone through it. And also, I just knew that we had to maintain, if we were going to maintain consistency, we all had to be on the same page. So in Vermont, we use the modules as they were prepared. You know, we don't change them at all. I have to say, just when I talk about Vermont, you probably all know Vermont's a really small state, and I don't think people realize how small it really is, but it's really small. And so we have 5 regional ombudsmen and about 15 or 20 volunteers. So part of the process that we use for training people really is a function of how small we are. So what we do is whenever we get some new volunteers and we reach this critical mass of new volunteers or new staff, we just do one of the modules. So over the past 6 or 7 years, we've repeated every module several times. And I know there was some concern that, you know, this would get old or people would get bored. It just hasn't happened. We haven't found that to be the case. Every time we do it, there are new people in the room. So they bring new questions. They're looking at it differently. A lot of us can't remember what we thought the right answer was a year ago. So even experienced staff have to sort of go through that whole process again. So we use a very interactive process because we are a small group. You know, we look at the modules, we look at the scenarios. Everyone sort of has an opportunity to explain what they think their answer is. And I think it's really important to give people a chance to defend their answer, because that's where you have the discussion. You always have to bring everybody back to sort of the basics, but you know, we try to have a discussion, and it changes depending on who's there. And I think that the discussion itself is as important, I mean, not quite as important as the answer, because the WINC is committed to that answer, but I think it is very important because it teaches people how to think through the different scenarios, because we all know that they're going to be out there by themselves trying to figure out how to code this particular, you know, case, or how to code this complaint, and having a good discussion during the training gives them the skill to sort of take it apart and analyze it and figure out, you know, how they're going to code that. So it's interesting, about a couple weeks ago we just did a training, and one of our staff is very interested in technology, and did a PowerPoint, which was great. So we had the materials on a PowerPoint, and what I think we realized was it actually wasn't probably as good for us as just having a discussion, because it felt a little bit like there was someone teaching at somebody, because, you know, we had this PowerPoint up on the screen, and I think, you know, we might not use it again, you know, because the discussion itself and giving everyone a chance to sort of show just how stupid they are, you know, sometimes when it comes to NORS, really sort of worked. And I think it really does give people the skills that they need to sort of tackle those tough questions when they're sitting in their office by themselves. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Rodriguez. I'm the California State Ombudsman. And unlike Vermont, we're a bigger state. We have about 130 paid staff and about 985 volunteers across 35 local ombudsman programs. And so, as you can imagine, consistency is a real challenge for us. We're in a decentralized state, and that means the state office contracts with the area agencies on aging, who then decide either to operate the program directly or to subcontract it out to a nonprofit. So we have a variety of organizational structures locally that house our ombudsman programs with varying levels of resources. I too was part of that original WINC committee that worked very, very long and hard on these modules to improve the consistency of our data. And we've made a commitment in California to really focus on NORS consistency, and we've done that several ways over the years. As the initial modules were first coming out, we would do a module at our state conference. We have a state conference twice a year with the managers of the local ombudsman programs. where we bring them information in a train the trainer format. So we modeled for them how we thought each of the modules should be presented to their staff and volunteers. When we lost a significant portion of our funding, we needed to come up with other ways of providing that training and ensuring that training is provided locally. So in the area plans that the area agencies submit to us, and in their updates that they submit to us each year, we have a requirement in the area plan that the local program will provide NORS consistency training to its staff and volunteers. And so we ask them for that year which modules they're going to provide and how often are they going to provide that training. And then we follow up with that at the end of the year to make sure that those training sessions did occur. Another way that we wanted to make sure that we provided training to local programs that needed assistance with that was to provide a regular ongoing series of conference call trainings on the NORS modules. And so every year, once a quarter, we host a toll-free conference call with any staff and volunteers that are able to join. Some of the volunteers will come to the local program office and sit together as a group, so you'll have 10 or 12 people in a room, plus their local ombudsman program coordinator. We might have individuals who can't travel in with ease to the local office, and so they'll call in from home, which makes it really convenient for them. And like Jackie, we don't do a webinar, we don't do a PowerPoint. The focus is really on the discussion. And so we'll go through each of the modules, 1, 2, 3, and 4, each quarter during the year. And we'll offer two sessions, one on Tuesday morning and then perhaps another one the following week on Thursday afternoon. If you can join us, great. If you can't, maybe you can make the next one. And we've done this now for the last 3 years. So we just cycle through each of the modules quarter after quarter. It was mentioned earlier, is there a fear that this will become boring or redundant? Well, people cycle in and out of our program. With a state of our size, we do have some turnover in the volunteer base, and so you're always attracting new people or people who want to hear it again. Very much, the process very much is one of dialogue, and so we'll go through each of the scenarios, and we'll have people read the basic principles where there are basic principles. I'll call on people to read the scenarios and to start the discussion about what they think the right answer is. Not only do we ask and discuss what the right answer is, but why it's the right answer. And if there's a different answer, we discuss maybe how that probably is one way of looking at trying to code the situation, but this answer that we're posing is really the better answer because it covers X, Y, and Z. I think one of the challenges that we face is trying to keep this fresh and new, especially for some of the people who have been with the program for a while. And so we're trying to think of new ways to perhaps build upon the existing NORS consistency training, but with maybe more complicated examples, scenarios from their own experiences that they maybe have brought to us with as coding questions, and to use those in training, because if it's happened in one program, it may happen in another program. And by getting their participation and their buy-in into the process, there's a real pride and ownership of the data, knowing how this data is used, knowing the importance of consistency, knowing how this data can really tell the story of what ombudsmen do on a daily basis in helping residents improve their quality of life and quality of care, can have a powerful impact and a sense of investment in ensuring that their data is the best that it can be. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eileen Bennett. I'm with Montgomery County's Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. I'm a local ombudsman, and I've been doing this for 22 years, and my primary responsibility is recruitment and training of volunteers for our program. So that training component includes doing NORS consistency training. And I have an opportunity to do this training several times a year, one with their original orientation. We actually do bring it in the very, very beginning. And then secondly, at least once a year with our current volunteers. And we have 2 meetings a month for our volunteers to join us. We meet in person as a combined group of those that are going to both assisted living facilities and nursing homes, and then we have a separate meeting for just those that are assigned to going to assisted living facilities. So the volunteers keep us humble. They keep us on track, and they definitely want things to be fresh and new. So one of my fun parts of the job is to ensure that we do keep things fun. And so I am a person who enjoys props. And for anybody who has not had an opportunity to see some of my props, I just wanted to share a couple of them with you. First and foremost, I always come prepared. I always have the answers. That's really important to the trainer. You're not only coming with the questions, but you need to know the consistent answers that you want that group to understand through consensus. So have it where you can grab it and mark it however you know that is, whether it is color coding, whether it is a specific folder like I have here today, or if it's just that you have an assistant who can give them to you during your training. Make sure that you have that. Props. Not all your eggs in one basket. I absolutely believe in the theory you need to walk away with a training caveat, something you know that you got. You might not remember what it is. You just remember you got it because you did something new. But in my case of all the eggs in one basket, I have 2 different kinds of eggs. And why that is because we can have 2 different kinds of answers sometimes. Sometimes an answer might be the right answer right off the bat, and sometimes one might be by consensus and we finally come to the right decision. So for all of you today, before you leave, you get your $1 million questions answered. Make sure you take an egg or 2. You're welcome to 2 if you would like. And just recognize that props make a difference. The second prop that I have, is I like color. Why do I like color? Because I'm pale and because it's fun, okay? And I have a magic bag, and this bag has been following me around for almost close to 10 years. And I always tell people I have to empty the bag before I can refill it. And the way I empty the bag is by people giving me the right answer. So when we come to the point where we give a right answer, something comes out of the bag and is given to the individual. Whether we do it at the end or during the process doesn't matter, but something that's fun, something they'll remember, usually something that includes chocolate and worthwhile remembering. So have a magic bag or a box. It can be a box that's, just a regular old junior carton filled with something that's worth their while, whatever that is. Volunteers appreciate any form of recognition, and this is just a very tiny way of doing recognition. So I thank you for your time, and I'll ask Kim to come forward.
Hi, I'm Kim Shetler, and I'm a regional ombudsman coordinator from Pennsylvania. And we embed our NORS training in almost all the training we do throughout the state. So we start out with our basic certification training when people first come into the program. And we have taken the NORS modules and literally embedded them into our training materials. So along with the NORS modules, we also have our state policies and procedures embedded in there as well. And that's really worked extremely well for us. One of the other things that we've done is to try to create some really dynamic, interactive PowerPoint presentations, and I know some of you aren't doing that. We find that to be really helpful because our groups are usually pretty large. We're kind of like California in structure, and so sometimes we're training anywhere from 20 to 50 people at a time when we do this. So we need to have materials that engage folks, but at the same time are also getting that message across. We use some of Sarah's tips. We have people actually read the scenarios. We do a lot of props and rewarding with prizes and candy as we go. The other thing that we found a challenge as trainers is sometimes we look at a sea of individuals out there that are kind of like glazed over, much like all of us are at this point in time in the day. And so we sometimes can't get a good read as to whether or not folks are getting the information. And so we developed these lovely little flashcards, and I'm going to share them with you. I know this sounds really hokey, but it really worked for us. In the, is this the true false quiz? Remember that, right? We literally have people hold up when we go through those questions. Is it true? Is it false? And it's a really good guide for you as the trainer, like, does the bulk of our group get this? Can we move forward? Or do we need to focus a little more time in this spot? And that really has helped us to not only take those 3-hour modules, which sometimes can be really challenging to train, forward in a more progressive manner and quickly for the individuals that are there. We sometimes have a blend of folks in the room who are seasoned ombudsmen and some that are brand new, and that adds to the discussion, but these kind of props help us as well. Our favorite ones, of course, are, is this a case, is this a consultation, or is it neither? Because that is one of the options. And so, again, it sounds kind of hokey sometimes when we're presenting it in this group format, but for us, it's been highly effective in getting some results. The one thing that I will say that's really critical whenever you're conducting this training is please get feedback from the folks that are in the room about whether it was meaningful and helpful, and don't be afraid to take some of those hits, like you really didn't have the right answer, because sometimes we don't always have all the right answers. It's helpful to look at those and redesign and reevaluate where you are. We also do quarterly meetings with all of our regions, and in each one of those quarterly meetings, we embed a TA, or what we call a technical assistance intensive, and we always come back to those original NORS modules as our basis for the TA that we provide quarterly to all the folks out there. So it is a system that's working well for us right now, but we're always open to new ideas. That's one thing that I will say. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody else as well. I'm going to turn it over to Shelley.
Thanks, Kim. Thank the rest of you for your wisdom. As I said, I'm the state ombudsman in Colorado. I've been on the job about 3.5 years, and I have some very vivid memories of my first few months on the job, especially around data. I'm housed in a nonprofit, and we contract with the State Unit on Aging, so that there was a person at the State Unit on Aging who had responsibility for our data. And he was working on some issues, so he pulled together a work group of a number of our local ombudsmen and me to discuss some issues and how we did things, et cetera. And the first aha moment was when about 6 of us were sitting around the table, and there were 6 different answers to all the questions that he asked. And I thought, okay, we have some work to do here. Why is it that the program in northern Colorado does things very differently than the program in southern Colorado? And that also led him to believe that we needed to do some training. So a couple months later, we scheduled an all-day training at my office, and we had about 35 or so of my staff ombudsmen sitting around the room, and virtually a whole day of NORS training. And let me just say that it was a virtual train wreck. By the end of the day, I think we were more confused than we were when we started. We had more questions than answers, and I thought, this is not the way for at least our program to do NORS training. And then I didn't do any NORS training for a while. That gentleman retired. And so then I tried asking the staff to review the modules once a year in their program. And they all, as I said, sort of rolled their eyes and said, you mean those same NORS modules that we've been doing for the last 100 years? And I said, yes. And they said, we've already done that. And I just felt like it was sort of a battle of the wills. I wasn't doing a very good job of convincing them that that was material that they should be reviewing. So my next approach was to try and do monthly calls. We're sort of in between the size of Vermont and California, but we have those mountains that run down the center of the state, and so we do have some logistical challenges in getting together on a real regular basis, and I received a fair amount of resistance from my folks, especially in the wintertime, for doing face-to-face get-togethers. So I said, well, let's do monthly calls. And what I was thinking was we would break it down into much smaller chunks and make it more manageable to cover a particular topic than to try and do a whole day. I also do monthly conference calls on cases and other more topical issues. And again, sometimes that's a little bit of a free-for-all. Ombudsmen generally tend to be opinionated, outspoken, et cetera. And even to have 10 or 12 of them on the phone at the same time can be, to manage it is a little bit of a challenge. So it occurred to me that if I used a PowerPoint that they could all pull up on their, that I could send to them, they all pull up on their computer, and that would be sort of the outline for this call. And now, this is not rocket science, and it's sort of it's not really a webinar, and it's an enhanced conference call, but it worked. Also because, you have 5 or 10 people that join 10 to 15 minutes after you've started, and they don't know where you are in the conversation, and so I can just say, we're on slide 10, and we can carry on. And it was a little more fun for me to put together the PowerPoint. You have a copy of it, I believe, the first one I did on case versus consultation on your disk. And I really took the material from the first module, cases versus consultation, and just put in some graphics, put in a few jokes, put in a little color. What else did I put in? Some screenshots. Our state uses Ombuds Manager, so occasionally there would be a screenshot, so if they were confused about where to put something, they could see it. A few additional examples. Sometimes I have some examples out of documentation that one of our ombudsmen had done, so I could use something very specific. I always start training by using a recent example of how I've had to use data. I mean, you've heard other speakers say, folks have to know why it's important. So I might say, gee, I was at the Commission on Aging last week, and they wanted to know how many abuse complaints we have. Or I'm getting ready to do our annual report, which we distribute to the legislature, and that's the first thing they look at every year is how many complaints we have and what our resolution rate is, and so this matters. So some very specific example of how I've used the data, again, to impress upon them why it's important. That's part of my PowerPoint, and because it's my PowerPoint that I'm using in Colorado, as Kim said, you can insert a little bit of state policy or guidance. I did this PowerPoint that's on your disk has been reviewed by Louise, and so sort of vetted, and a little stamp of approval that it's consistent with the NOR's instructions. And that's where we walk a very fine line as we try and get creative and infuse our state policies or our view of things. That's when we start that NOR's drift that Sarah was talking about. And so we appreciate if you would send us materials that you develop, just so we can take a look at it, Louise and the WINC, to say, gee, yeah, that is still consistent with the current instructions. And it proved to be very manageable. We did have a flow. I made sure we got things covered. Questions that came up that I hadn't anticipated, then I could go back and modify that PowerPoint with sort of a clarification, or I could see where it wasn't clear. And then it was also a document that they could refer back to, use for training themselves. So that has worked well. And then the second thing I have been doing is a tip of the week. And I just keep a running list of questions that have been asked, things that maybe come up in our WINC conference calls, a question that we've answered, an aha moment that I've had. Sometimes because of a question somebody's asked me. I mean, I had a volunteer say to me not too long ago, well, I figured if I resolved the issue, I didn't have to code it. It was only unresolved complaints that I put into Ombuds Manager, and my eyes rolled back in my head, and I had a little fainting spell. So that's an easy tip of the week. And I try, just one thing, and again, that's digestible. People can sort of process one tip, because this stuff can be a little overwhelming all at once. Another ombudsman told me she didn't code anything, she didn't code consultations if it wasn't in person. I said, oh, well, gee, if you talk to somebody over the phone and you've spent half an hour with them and you're giving them all that wonderful ombudsman wisdom, you can code that as a consultation. So there's my NORS tip for that week. So I just do that. I just keep a running list. I haven't gotten to the point where I've started recycling them yet, because there's plenty of material out there. And then just the other thing that happens for us, and we've referenced it several times, is that we as ombudsmen would much rather talk about the nitty-gritty of the case and the advocacy strategy and the investigation and all the different nuances of what might happen, or what if this and what if this. And they much more like to talk about that than they would like to talk about where it's coded. And so having to continually refocus staff, and if I've got an example, it's assume that nothing else, assume it happened just like it says on the paper there. And that we can talk about how we go about it later. This is about after you've done it, whatever you did, where you're going to code it. So it's not how you did it, but where you're going to code it when you're done. And those are very distinct processes. And it requires a fair amount of discipline to bring people back, because they'd much rather talk about, the what ifs. And sometimes you can take an example and sort of stratify it. Start with this very straightforward example. This happened, and therefore it's a consultation. Okay, well then part B is, well then the ombudsman did this and this. Well, how does that change your answer? And sort of keep working with one set of facts, but make the distinction and show them how it changes over time or depending on the actions that the ombudsman took. So that's what we've done in Colorado. It has preserved my sanity so far. And I think now we're ready to hear from all of you.
Carol Scott, and I'm the state ombudsman from Missouri. And my question really is, how many of you have your volunteers actually do the coding of the 133 categories?
In Montgomery County, Maryland, I won't speak for all of Maryland, we have several out of 55. I would say we have about 4 who will do their own coding because it is part of the discipline that they had prior to coming to being a volunteer ombudsman. They were very used to that type of coding, but the majority do not. It's usually staff.
Generally, in our program, when a complaint is first made to the program, there's an initial coding of that complaint that's made. Once the ombudsman conducts his or her investigation of the complaint and the results of that investigation, she or he will either verify or not verify that complaint, or perhaps there's a better complaint code that fits that problem once more information is obtained. In some of our local programs, that coding is done at the office if it's a problem that's been called into the office, and then the ombudsman who investigates the complaint will follow up and verify whether or not that's the correct code. Some of our programs, and we're really working toward making this consistent, but some of our programs, volunteers don't code the complaint. They'll describe the problem, write it up as best they can, and then staff back at the local office will then code the complaint based on the information they've received.
So in Vermont, all of the volunteers actually do their own coding. They don't enter the data. We use Ombuds Manager. They don't enter it into Ombuds Manager. We have one volunteer actually who does all the data entry for all the volunteers. But the paperwork comes, the volunteer paperwork with the coding comes to the ombudsman who supervises them, and they review it before it's passed on to the volunteer who does the actual data entry.
I'm just going to add, when I was the Washington State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, it was in the volunteer, excuse me, it was in the volunteer ombudsman job description that they would turn in monthly reports. So it was an expectation that they did coding on their activity sheets, and then the regional ombudsman would review that. But it was talking about that embedding your NORS consistency and data collection. It was upfront. They had to do it, and that's still the case.
Thanks, Louise. Colorado does basically the same thing. The volunteers are required to fill out a monthly report and at least take a first stab at the coding. But it's staff that actually enter the data into the computer system. Trying to train all these volunteers in the actual data entry scares me a little. So, other thoughts, questions? What are the rest of you doing?
All right, my name is Debbie Lee, and I work with the Ombudsman program in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have a question and a comment. We have a fairly new data collection system, and one of the things that I'm interested in is hearing from Louise or somebody about how, with all the different data collection systems that are out there, can we get more consistency since we're all using different systems. And the comment is, in the system that we have, one of the few things that I actually do like is a dialogue that is a Q&A opportunity, so that if I have a question, I can put that into the network and the state ombudsman can review that and respond back to that. So it's in the actual system and not in a separate email, so it's right there with the data collection system, and that's handy.
But they all have to meet the NORS requirements. And so there might be add-ons, things that you collect in your state that AOA doesn't want. But then when it comes time for the state ombudsman to report, they are entering their data, or if they use Ombuds Manager, the data is pulled into the ombudsman reporting tool, the AOA software. And so that is how we, that is how we collect the NORS data. So as long as your software meets the NORS requirements, that's what matters to AOA. And what software your state uses is up to the state. But that's a very cool little tool that you have in your system where you can ask a question, and yeah, very cool.
Hi, I'm Patty Ducaye, and I work for the state of Texas and the state ombudsman. And I wanted to give a tip or two. One thing is that we just revised our training manual for all ombudsmen in Texas. And so just re-emphasizing what has been said today, I think it is really important to integrate NORS concepts into your training, even if you're not doing the whole NORS consistency training at the very start. And what we did was, what I heard from local ombudsmen was that they really needed to train their volunteers about completing our statewide activity report from the first training. And so we put that into a manual where we had never done that before. So we integrated how they report to us with NORS instructions, and then gave them a start at coding practice and those sorts of things. And we've gotten good feedback from that so far. And secondly, I wanted to say that I would recommend, if you're developing any kinds of practice scenarios about how to code something, if you're making up new ideas on top of any NORS consistency training that's been developed, that you think about vetting that through the WINC, because we're at risk in states of creating new ideas, giving new scenarios and assigning the activity code to that, and then sending our whole state in the wrong direction. So I would like to add that as a recommendation.
They don't. I'd be interested in seeing what other states are using to have people collect their data, what columns they have, how much space they leave for just writing out the complaint.
One of the things that, I've had many aha moments in my 3.5 years, was when I understood that NORS had 12 categories of activity by ombudsmen that they were interested in collecting. And then I pulled the drop down in my system, and there were 23 or 24 activities listed there. So it took me a little while to figure out that those get mapped, connected to. So I might have 3 or 4 different categories of visitation or whatever, or other kinds of meetings. We had a culture change activity and some ethics committees. And my staff was spending a lot of time trying to figure out which of those particular categories a particular meeting or event fit into. And once they realized that all 4 of these all mapped up to community education, that made their life a whole lot simpler. So it was just understanding how what you're asking fits into what AOA is interested in knowing. And another aha moment was my local ombudsman had never seen their actual ORT report. They entered the data at the, it was in by the end of the year, and then they never saw it again. And so just even showing them that, how what they put in on a daily basis translates into one yearly report, again, helped them connect the dots a little bit around the data.
I think it's real important that your state ombudsman share with your regional ombudsman, and your regional ombudsman share with your staff and volunteers, not just the names of the complaint codes, but the complaint codes and the definitions. Because sometimes what might appear to be a good fit for this particular code when you really read the definition of that complaint, it would probably fit maybe someplace else. And so I think, we need to really remember that we need to give our volunteers and staff the complete set of complaint codes so that they understand where this complaint really fits. I think that's a big step toward improving consistency of the data.
I'm Joan Earhart. I'm the State Ombudsman for North Dakota. I have a comment more than a question. I really appreciate the information that I've learned here today. I only have 4 part-time paid ombudsmen in North Dakota. 3 of them have been around for a long time, a lot longer than I have, and they've fallen into this trench. And they don't want to learn anything new, and they certainly don't want to learn anything about NORS and how to code because they think they know it all. And I've questioned and have discovered in the past that they don't know it all, so you've given me some tips, and I do appreciate that. And I hope they don't see me talking on this microphone.
Well, that is a challenge. If people have been doing it for a long time and they're busy, they have other things to focus on and other things they want to learn. And there needs to be something that's sort of a wake-up call that says maybe we have had a little drift, or, and the instructions do change. I don't exactly how often.
The answers potentially can change every 5 years, but for the past 10 years, they've not significantly changed. I would say in the future, we'll be looking at, there will be a more significant change. I would also say that falling in the trench and kind of getting stuck in what you're doing, if you can show the impact, the miscoding means I can't provide proper information to the legislature, or, whoever, however you can kind of localize that, and use the data to get them more excited about it. I know when I was in Washington State, we did lots of uses of the data, so it got people more engaged to want to get those reports in and, try and do their best because the data was used to tell the story at the legislature, for instance.
I'd like to say I'm probably one of those ones that would say I know it all, and my state ombudsman can't teach me a darn thing, and I've been humbled many times. And one of the ways of doing that, and this is a suggestion, is for the state ombudsman to turn around to the know-it-all and say, okay, teach me. Let's go through it together. So give them an assignment to bring to the group, even if it's 4, and you be part of the learning experience too. And that will make a difference to those that think they know it all and might need a little humbling like me. Thank you.
This discussion also reminded me of a training I've done in 2 or 3 states lately where there were a number of very experienced, long-time ombudsmen at the local level who were doing excellent work. But they, too, thought they really had it down with NORS and really didn't see why they need to sit through training again. So we did the NORS coding training and got into a lot of discussion, and you could see that there were very different opinions about what to do and why. So we worked through that using some of the tips we've already discussed. But as a part of that training, in one place, each local program had their own NORS report for the last quarter, their data. And even though they weren't using it for management tool, there were a number of things they could do with it. So we printed that in hard copy. We gave them some scenarios. Suppose this happened. Suppose a letter to the editor of the newspaper appeared blasting the ombudsman program for not doing X, Y, and Z, which all the scenarios were based upon things that have happened around the country. So we tweaked them some. How do you use your NORS data to come up with a response that you can support because you can point back to data to tell the story of your program, to be your defense? Or how can you plan? There were a variety of different kinds of scenarios, ranging from funding to a program being criticized to just basic complaint handling. And we had them look at their own data. And then we've done some other things in training like that where we've had them look at data and also look at how they describe their program and see were the two consistent. And that began to kind of open the door to some opportunities to talk about let's go back and look at coding and consistency and the importance of it, making sure that we have it correct and consistent within our own state, much less the things I talked about in terms of what happens nationally when people slice and dice that data and get articles appearing in journals or congressional reports about the value of this program.
That makes me think actually about some of the arguments that our local programs have given our state ombudsman in terms of the time that it takes to enter data into new systems. And for every moment that one is entering data into a computer system, it's a lost moment actually accomplishing work in the field. And I'd be very interested in sort of the tips of, I think that veteran ombudsmen often get into a shortcut trench that may not be in the best interest of data collection. And so if there are any tips that individuals have of how to persuade veteran ombudsmen that the shortcut tips that they think they know, or helping them balance the value of the data entry time spent versus time working would be helpful.
Well, that makes me think of another thing that I have done with the data, and I have about 50 paid staff in 16 programs around the state, and I've blocked out the identity, but I have then charted the activity of different ombudsmen, and where you'll see one ombudsman has done 25 trainings, and another one has had 100 cases, and another one has had 0. Again, I've just said, this is not, again, it's anonymous, but start thinking about, are you over or under reporting in certain categories, or why is it that your colleague in the same office as you in the same region has 100 cases and you had 25? So just, again, analysis of the data and asking what it means about the behavior or where we're spending our time, and do we need to refocus our efforts.
Some of you heard me speak, yesterday, I guess it was, in the Ombuds Manager user group. But I talked a little bit about our monitoring process in Pennsylvania and how we set a goal this year to actually physically go on site and provide technical assistance to all 52 of our local programs. And by doing that, what we did is some of those folks who really felt like they had bang-up programs, and they really do great work, but they're not doing a real great job of capturing that activity, came to light when we ran 12 months worth of data and put it before them and said, tell us about what you're doing. And they started to tell us a story, and then we were able to physically show them that the data isn't reflecting that story. And so sometimes you really do have to look at that, and say, part of what you need to do is apply all of that consistency training that we've been giving you all along. And that can be challenging and hard for folks to hear sometimes, but I think that's a really key part of the process. If we don't give people feedback along the way, training is useless. I mean, we have to continue. That's part of the training process then, is that individualized feedback that we give each program.
Can't help you with resolving these issues on a systems level when we don't have the data that shows there's a problem. So if we've got a problem with the implementation of the POLST form in California, it does me little good to give anecdotal information that doesn't describe the scope of the problem, unless I can say I've received, X number of complaints about this particular problem with POLST implementation. If I can get that from my data collection system, I'm going to be able to help you be more efficient, because if we can resolve it here, you may sooner or later not have to deal with these recurring problems on an individual basis. It could help to make your program more efficient.
Know that there is more training coming. We have 2 more webinars coming up, and then we are looking at doing some advanced training, and that we really would appreciate you funneling us what you're doing, what questions you have in terms of NORS coding and consistency, so that we can all get on the same page. Because if our numbers continue to go down and don't show the hard work and advocacy that we're doing, I mean, does that put our funding at risk? That's a lot of what I also tell my local folks is, if you're not putting in the system the work that you do, I'm going to have a real hard time advocating for level funding, much less an increased funding. So it's your paycheck, folks. So thank you all, and we look forward to hearing from you again.